The pain in my lower back was a dull throb that had become my constant companion over the last 6 months, but it was nothing compared to the sharp sting of silence that filled my kitchen every morning. I sat at the granite island, clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee, while my wife Elena tapped furiously on her phone. She was dressed in a sharp navy blazer and a pencil skirt that showed off the figure she worked so hard to maintain. She looked beautiful, but cold. Like a marble statue I was no longer allowed to touch. Elena was the head administrator at St. Jude's private hospital, a position she had climbed to with ruthless ambition over the last 10 years. I was just Mark. To her new friends and her younger colleagues, I was the invisible husband who stayed home and managed the investments. They did not know that I had built the foundation of her career. They did not know that I was the one who paid for her MBA and supported us for years while she interned. All they saw was a man in his 50s who walked with a slight limp and drove a 5-year-old sedan. I cleared my throat, and the sound seemed to annoy her. Elena, without looking up, asked if I had taken my medication yet. I told her I had, but that it wasn't working anymore. I told her the doctor called yesterday. The spinal stenosis was getting worse. If I didn't get the decompression surgery soon, I risked permanent nerve damage. I could lose the use of my legs. Elena finally looked up, but her eyes held no sympathy, only calculation. She asked how much it would cost. I told her the insurance would cover 60%, but because we needed the best neurosurgeon in the state, Dr. Sterling, the out-of-pocket costs for the facility and his private fee would be around $40,000. She scoffed and went back to her phone. She said $40,000 was ridiculous. She said we didn't have that kind of liquidity right now. She told me to just up the pain meds and wait until the next fiscal year. I stared at her. I knew our finances better than she did. I knew we had over $200,000 in the joint savings account. I reminded her of this. I said, the money was there, Elena. This is my spine. This is my ability to walk. She stood up abruptly, slamming her hand on the counter. She told me to stop being so dramatic, Mark. She said that money was earmarked for investment properties. She said she wasn't going to drain our future just because my back hurt a little. She told me she had to go. She had a conference in Napa Valley for the weekend, a very important networking event with the board of directors. She grabbed her bag and walked out the door without kissing me goodbye. I sat there in the silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. She had refused to pay for my surgery. She had chosen a hypothetical investment over my health. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. It wasn't just the money. It was the way she looked at me, like I was a burden, like I was expired goods. For a few hours I wallowed in self-pity, but then a desperate thought took hold. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe the job was getting to her. I decided I wouldn't let our marriage die without a fight. I would drive up to Napa. I would surprise her. I would book a room at the same resort and take her out for a romantic dinner. We would talk. I would make her understand. I packed a bag, ignoring the shooting pains in my back. The drive to Napa took 3 hours. When I arrived at the Silver Oak Resort, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the vineyards. It was a place of incredible luxury. I walked into the lobby, feeling underdressed in my polo shirt and slacks. I approached the front desk and asked for Elena Vance's room. The young woman behind the counter typed on her keyboard and then hesitated. She looked at me with a strange expression. It was pity. She asked if I was Mr. Vance. I said yes. She lowered her voice and said Mrs. Vance was in the presidential suite, but she wasn't sure if now was a good time. I smiled tightly and said I wanted to surprise her. I asked for a key card. The receptionist hesitated again, but eventually handed it over. She watched me walk toward the elevators with sad eyes. The presidential suite was on the top floor. The hallway was thick with plush carpet that muffled my footsteps. I reached the double doors of the suite and raised my hand to knock, but then I heard a laugh. It was a deep, booming laugh that I recognized instantly. It was Dr. Sterling, the neurosurgeon, the man who was supposed to operate on me. The man Elena said was too expensive. My hand froze in midair. I leaned closer to the door. I heard Elena's voice. It was light and breathless, a tone she hadn't used with me in 15 years. She told him to stop it. She said he was bad. Sterling laughed again. He asked her about the old man. He asked if I was still whining about my back. I felt the blood drain from my face. Elena sighed. She said I was pathetic. She said I was begging for the surgery, but she shut it down. She told Sterling she wasn't going to waste 40 grand on a man she was planning to divorce in 6 months anyway. She said she needed that money for their trip to Italy. Sterling chuckled. He said she was ruthless and that was why he loved her. He said not to worry. He said once he took over the chairmanship of the hospital board, they would have all the money they needed. He said he would drag out my consultation process until I was in a wheelchair, and then she could put me in a home. My world shattered. It wasn't a crack. It was a complete demolition. The woman I had loved for 20 years wasn't just cheating on me. She was actively planning my physical ruin to fund her affair. She was sentencing me to a wheelchair so she could go to Italy with the arrogant doctor who was supposed to fix me. I stood there, trembling. My first instinct was to kick down the door and scream. I wanted to tear them apart. But then the pain in my back flared, a sharp reminder of my vulnerability. If I went in there now, I was just a crippled husband making a scene. They would laugh at me. They would call security. I would lose everything. I lowered my hand. I took a deep breath. I turned around and walked back to the elevator. Every step was agony, but the physical pain was now fuel. I didn't drive home. I checked into a Motel 6 5 miles down the road. I sat on the lumpy bed and stared at the wall for hours. Then I picked up my phone. I didn't call Elena. I called Arthur. Arthur was my personal attorney and my oldest friend. He picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. I told him about the refusal to pay, the trip, the conversation through the door. Arthur was silent for a moment. Then he asked what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to destroy them. I told him I wanted to activate the contingency plan. You see, there was something Elena and Dr. Sterling didn't know. They knew I was an investor, but they thought I was a small-time retail investor who got lucky in the 90s. They didn't know the specifics of my portfolio. They didn't know that through a series of holding companies and blind trusts, I was the majority shareholder of the medical conglomerate that owned St. Jude's Hospital. I had bought it 5 years ago to secure Elena's position, but I had kept my name off the paperwork to let her feel like she earned it. I had created a monster, and now I had to put it down. I spent the next 3 days in that motel room. I didn't sleep. I dug into every financial record we had. I accessed Elena's private emails, which she foolishly left logged in on our shared cloud account. The betrayal was absolute. She had been funneling money from our joint savings into a shell account for 6 months. She had bought Sterling a $50,000 watch. She had paid for this suite. She was using my money to sleep with another man while I could barely walk. But the most damning evidence was the emails between her and Sterling regarding the hospital. They were conspiring to force out the current board chairman, accusing him of senility so Sterling could take the seat. They mocked the patients. They mocked the staff. It was professional suicide written in black and white. On Tuesday, I drove home. I was sitting in the recliner when Elena walked in. She looked refreshed. She tossed her bag on the floor and asked if I had managed to feed myself while she was gone. I looked at her and lied. I said I was fine. I said she was right about the money. I said I would wait on the surgery. I apologized for being dramatic. She smiled a smug, victorious smile. She kissed me on the forehead, a cold peck. She said she was glad I was being sensible. She said she had a big board meeting on Friday where they were going to announce some exciting leadership changes. She said I should come. It would look good for her to have a supportive husband there, even if I just sat in the back. I said I wouldn't miss it for the world. The next 3 days were a masterclass in acting. I played the frail, defeated husband. I let her talk down to me. I let her ignore me. Meanwhile, Arthur was finalizing the paperwork, and I made one more phone call. I called Dr. Marcus Aris. Dr. Aris was a world-renowned neurosurgeon. He was the rock star of the medical world, the man who wrote the textbooks Sterling pretended to read. But 30 years ago, Marcus Aris was just a broke medical student who couldn't afford tuition. I was the anonymous donor who paid his fees. We had kept in touch over the years. He called me boss as a joke, because I had technically employed him when he worked summers at my first company. I told Marcus I needed a favor. I told him I needed surgery, and I told him I needed him to crash a party. Friday arrived. Elena helped me tie my tie, complaining that my suit was out of style. She drove us to the hospital. The board meeting was being held in the main auditorium. It was packed. Doctors, nurses, administrators, and donors were all there. Elena left me in the back row. She marched up to the stage and took her seat next to Dr. Sterling. Sterling looked like a peacock in a tailored Italian suit. He scanned the crowd, his eyes passing over me without a flicker of recognition. The meeting began. The current chairman, a kind old man named Dr. Reynolds, gave a speech about community service. Elena and Sterling were whispering to each other, smirking. Then came the moment they had planned. Elena stood up. She took the microphone. She spoke about the need for new blood. She spoke about modernization. She seamlessly pivoted to a motion to restructure the board, implying that Dr. Reynolds was no longer capable of leading. It was a coup. Sterling stood up to second the motion. He launched into a speech about excellence. He said St. Jude's needed leadership that wasn't afraid to make hard choices. He said they needed to cut costs on charity cases and focus on high-yield procedures. The room was tense. Dr. Reynolds looked blindsided. Elena smiled, beaming at the crowd. "We have a vision," she said. "And we have the support of the top medical minds." That was the cue. The double doors at the back of the auditorium swung open with a loud bang. Every head turned. Walking down the center aisle was Dr. Marcus Aris. He was flanked by two men in dark suits. A silence fell over the room so heavy you could hear the air conditioning hum. Marcus Aris was a legend. His presence at a regional hospital board meeting was like the president walking into a PTA meeting. Elena's jaw dropped. Sterling looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Dr. Aris didn't look at the stage. He walked straight toward me. I was sitting in the back row, slumped in my seat, holding my cane. Marcus stopped right in front of me. The whole room was watching. "I got your message," Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly in the silent room. "Sorry I'm late." The traffic from the airport was a nightmare. I looked up at him and smiled. "You're just in time, Marcus." Dr. Aris nodded. Then he did something that made the entire room gasp. He bowed his head slightly in deference. "It's good to see you, boss." "Boss?" The word echoed from the stage. It was Elena. She was staring at us, her face pale. I stood up. I gripped my cane and ignored the pain. I walked into the aisle next to Marcus. "Hello, Elena," I said. My voice wasn't weak anymore. It was the voice I used in the boardroom 30 years ago. "What is this?" Sterling demanded, stepping to the edge of the stage. "Who invited you?" "I did," I said. "I invited him because I prefer my neurosurgeons to be competent. Unlike some." Sterling turned red. "Security, get this man out of here. He's interrupting an official board meeting." "I don't think so." Arthur walked in from the side door holding a briefcase. He marched up to the stage and handed a thick stack of documents to Dr. Reynolds. "What is this?" Reynolds asked. "That," I said, walking slowly down the aisle toward the stage, "is the updated shareholder disclosure. It reveals that the Vanguard Trust, which holds 51% of the voting stock in this hospital, is solely owned by me, Mark Vance." A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. Elena grabbed the podium to steady herself. "You?" she whispered into the microphone. "But you're broke. You're just... you." "I am the man who paid for your degree," I said, continuing my slow walk. "I am the man who paid for your car. I am the man who bought this hospital to give you a safe place to work. And I am the man whose spinal surgery you refused to pay for so you could buy a watch for your boyfriend." The crowd erupted. Whispers turned into shouts. People were pointing. I reached the front of the stage. I looked up at Sterling. He was sweating profusely. "Dr. Sterling," I said, "you are fired, effective immediately, not just from the board but from the hospital. We will be reporting your ethical violations regarding patient selection to the State Medical Licensing Board. I have the recordings from the hotel room door where you discussed denying care to a patient for personal gain. That patient being me." Sterling stumbled back, knocking over his chair. I turned to Elena. She looked small, terrified. "Mark," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Mark, please, we can talk about this at home. You're misunderstanding." "There is no home, Elena," I said. "I had the locks changed this morning. Your things are in a storage unit. Arthur has the key. He also has the divorce papers." "Mark, wait!" she cried out, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I did it for us. I wanted us to be powerful." "You wanted to be powerful," I corrected her. "I just wanted to be your husband. But I see now that position is vacant." I turned to Dr. Aris. "Marcus is the OR prepped." "Ready when you are, boss," Marcus grinned. I've got the best team in the country waiting upstairs on the house, of course. Good, I said. Let's go. My back is killing me. I turned my back on the stage. I didn't look at Elena as she collapsed into her chair sobbing. I didn't look at Sterling as security guards moved in to escort him out. I walked up the aisle with my head high, the top surgeon in the world walking a step behind me. The surgery was a success. It took 6 hours. When I woke up, the pain in my legs was gone. For the first time in years, I could wiggle my toes without agony. The recovery took a few months. I did it alone in a new condo overlooking the ocean. I didn't need a nurse because I hired the best private care money could buy. The divorce was messy but short. The prenup I had convinced Elena to sign 20 years ago, which she thought was to protect her from my debt, ironically protected my assets from her greed. She walked away with nothing but her clothes and the leased car, which she couldn't afford to make payments on. Sterling lost his license. The medical board doesn't take kindly to doctors who conspire to harm patients. He ended up moving to another state working in insurance sales. 6 months later, I was walking on the beach. No cane, no limp. I felt 10 years younger. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Elena. It was the 10th one this week. Mark, I miss you. I made a mistake. Sterling meant nothing. Can we just meet for coffee, please? I'm staying at my sister's on the couch. I need you. I looked at the waves crashing against the shore. I thought about the hotel door. I thought about the $40,000 she wouldn't spend to save my spine. I typed a reply. I loved you, Elena, but I love myself more. Goodbye. I blocked the number. I put the phone in my pocket and kept walking. The sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in a long time I was completely pain-free. I had cut out the cancer in my life, and I had never felt better. It has been a year since the surgery, and life has a funny way of balancing the scales. I took over as the official chairman of the board at St. Jude's, not from the shadows this time, but right out in the open. We cleaned house. We fired the sycophants who had enabled Sterling, and we set up a fund for patients who couldn't afford complex surgeries. I named it the Second Chance Initiative. It felt good to use my money for something that actually healed people instead of just feeding an ego. I was at a charity gala last weekend, held in the very same ballroom where Elena had once tried to humiliate me. I was standing near the chocolate fountain chatting with Dr. Aris and a lovely woman named Sarah. Sarah wasn't a corporate climber. She was a librarian I met at a bookstore 3 months ago. She didn't know about the hospital or the millions until our third date, and when she found out, she didn't care. She just liked that I listened to her. As the band started playing a slow jazz number, I saw a commotion near the entrance. The security guards were blocking someone from entering. It was a woman in a faded waitress uniform looking disheveled and desperate. It was Elena. I excused myself from Sarah and walked over. Not because I wanted to talk to her, but because I didn't want a scene. When Elena saw me approaching, her eyes lit up with a manic sort of hope. She looked 10 years older. The stress of bankruptcy and the shame of public scandal had etched deep lines into her face. "Mark," she gasped, trying to push past the guard. "Mark, tell them to let me in. I just need to talk to you for 5 minutes. Please, I'm working double shifts at a diner downtown. I can't do it anymore. I miss our life." I stopped 5 feet away. I looked at her and I searched for that old spark of love or even pity, but there was nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. "You're trespassing, Elena," I said calmly. "This is a private event." "But I'm your wife," she cried out, causing heads to turn. "Ex-wife," I corrected her. "And you made your choice. You chose the money and the status over the man. Now you have neither." "I'm sorry," she sobbed, falling to her knees. "I'm so sorry, Mark. Can't you forgive me?" I looked down at her. "I forgave you a long time ago, Elena. Holding on to anger is bad for the back, but forgiveness doesn't mean access. You are a lesson I learned, and I don't need to learn it twice." I signaled to the head of security. "Please escort Ms. Vance off the property and ensure she doesn't return." "Mark!" she screamed as they lifted her up and guided her out the heavy oak doors. The doors clicked shut, silencing her cries. I straightened my jacket and took a deep breath. The air in the room felt cleaner. I walked back to Sarah, who was waiting for me with a concerned look. "Is everything okay?" she asked, touching my arm gently. I smiled, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely free. "Yes," I said, taking her hand, "everything is perfect. Now would you like to dance?" We walked onto the dance floor, and as the music swelled, I realized that the best revenge wasn't destroying Elena. It was being happy without her, and that is exactly what I intended to do for the rest of my life. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this tale of betrayal and vindication, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And let us know in the comments, would you have forgiven Elena if you were in Mark's shoes, or did she get exactly what she deserved? We'll see you in the next video.